Disclaimer, I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be an expert. I've never visited Expertville, and I have never spent any meaningful time in Expertville. We're going to look at the Joe Rogan, Dave Smith, Douglas Murray conversation, the debate from yesterday, which was extremely revealing. To many people, it's caused a divide in the moderate and right-wing circles because many say Dave Smith owned him. Many say Douglas Murray owned him because he's an expert and he spent time in all these places. And it's really created a rift. So we're going to look at the highlights, but I want to make one comment before we look at these clips. It is COVID era strategy of saying, trust the experts no matter what they say. And that has been completely discredited. You should be allowed to ask questions. You should be allowed to platform whoever you want. And within a minute, Douglas Murray is saying, you should platform more people who are pro-Israel or pro-Ukraine. This gatekeeper ideology of people who know things want people to not platform people who don't have a PhD, don't have a degree, aren't a historian, aren't a journalist. It doesn't work anymore. And if these people were self-serving, they would stop saying it and stop employing that strategy because they are not trusted anymore in the eyes of so many people. The other thing is, it's funny how you could be an expert in concrete or drywall or veterinary medicine, and that gives you the latitude to have a conversation about any geopolitical situation that you'd like because you're an expert, so you don't get the same criticism as somebody who doesn't have a degree in the field of question. So here you go. At the very beginning of the podcast.
Okay.
And well, Douglas,
can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Since the war in Israel began, and since the war in Ukraine began, you've had quite a lot of...
That's why you're here together.
Okay.
And
well,
Douglas,
can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Since the war in Israel began, and since the war in Ukraine began, you've had quite a lot of people who are very against both in different ways.
Yes.
Do you think you've had enough people on who are supportive of either war?
I don't know that word enough, if that's a good word.
Let's say enough people who are on the side of Israel instead of wild critics of Israel.
Well, I've had a few. I mean, I believe God Sad is on the side of Israel.
For sure.
Jordan is on the side of Israel.
You had Mike Baker, Coleman Hughes.
Yeah.
Coleman did it for like 20 minutes, so it wasn't why he was here.
No, I mean none of them, and none of them is why they're here. You know, it's a good question.
Do you think you've tilted one way?
Me personally?
No, just with the guests you've had.
The guests, yeah, probably more tilted towards the idea that perhaps the way they've done it is barbaric.
Mm-hmm. But why do you think that is, just out of interest? I'm just interested in your selection of guests because you're like the world's number one podcast. So.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think.
And this continues. So throughout the first hour of the podcast, this is this paradox that Douglas Murray perpetuates of you need to be an expert. But I'm not saying you have to be an expert to have a conversation around it. But then you have a cop-out. Well, I'm not saying that you have a cop-out. And it's so confusing how this makes any sense. It's like he's being dim about his statements. And this Sam Harris does this too. I'm this intellectual, and so I can gobbledygook enough information out to where you forget the original question and point anyway. And it's like, are you gaslighting me, or are you just trying to avoid admitting that you're wrong, that you're contradicting yourself constantly? The trusting the experts situation. If you didn't get enough of the trust the experts conversation back during COVID when you would be deplatformed, God forbid you made money from social media, or you had any type of business that relied on social media, you'd be deplatformed if you asked questions. If you said, I had an adverse event from the medication I was given, and the medication that I was told worked, I couldn't get. But you trust the experts. You're not a horse. Don't take this medication that has been working. Okay. So to trust the experts, we've heard it so many times. We'll look through this clip, but I think we're all sick and tired of it.
I do also think that one of the bigger, kind of the bigger picture dynamics to all of this is that we have, at least since 9/11, been in a state of perpetual war. And all of these wars have been disasters. They have been so many lies involved in selling all of them. I mean, the whole Iraq war, the whole war in Afghanistan, just lying the whole way through. I mean, I remember literally having conversations with Green Berets in the middle of the war in Afghanistan, and they're like, George W. Bush is telling you that the army we're building up there is really successful. This thing's going to fall in a week without us. And then all through the Obama administration, it's just like lie after lie after lie with disastrous wars. And so this does create a fertile ground for people to say, I wonder if they were lying about all these wars.
Sure.
Again, I'm not really trying to argue with you about World War II. I'd rather argue about these wars
ground.
today.
I think the interesting question is whether you're busy watering it.
Well, should you not talk about mistakes that were made
You should.
overall?
Absolutely.
Okay, you should.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm all for going
So-
back and looking at mistakes.
So what is your argument then?
It's a very weird thing to go back, zone in on a man, say this one thing is a mistake and should characterize him, and you ignore everything else.
You're taking him
It's
out of
like
context
wildly
when you're
weird
talking about
thing to
Daryl,
do.
who's done, what was it, 30 plus hours?
So what? 30 plus hours of
But you
podcasting.
take-
you do that in a week.
He's not
Yeah, but it's a
wrong.
very different thing.
different
It's a very
thing.
different thing.
He's not doing a podcast like talking to people.
Okay, nor is he doing scholarly work, nor is he working in the archives clearly. Come on. I mean, he is not the historian of our era.
He's not claiming to be.
Nobody's claiming
This
it.
is the thing, Joe. This is like punching jelly.
No, but you
It can
don't
always
consume
adapt-
but
it
you
can
don't
adapt
consume his
around.
work.
What I'm saying, because I don't need to consume endless versions of a revisionist history. I understand.
But
I
it's
know where
not
this comes
revisionist
from.
history. If you listen to his work, it's not revisionist history. He's basing it on historical
But
work.
yeah, I know. But okay, so this is my point about jelly. It's a shape-shifting thing. Comedian or historian?
He's not a comedian.
Historian or podcast? Would-be historian or actual historian? You say he doesn't claim to be a historian, but he's pumping out tens of hours of
Well, neither
history.
does Dan Carlin. He doesn't claim to be a historian either.
You see my point about the move? It's like some weird jiu-jitsu move.
No, I don't-
Where you say, hang on, you know all about this as well. You say, I'm not a historian, but I'm going to spend my time talking about history.
And you're not allowed to do that.
I'm not a journalist, but I'm going to spend my time talking about this thing. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to spend my time talking about this thing. It's a weird move, yeah?
No.
You don't think?
No, I'm a free American. I can talk about
you
what
can
I like
talk
to.
about
So
what
I
you
don't.
want.
So what is the point
I've
here?
noticed you can, but
But
we
what's
all
the
can.
point?
The point is, what are you pushing? What are you watering?
What am
Why?
I pushing?
Yes.
Liberty, free markets, peace, prosperity, not getting in another stupid catastrophic war, which we're on the precipice of right now. That's what I'm pushing.
What are we on the precipice of?
Well, I think weren't you just talking about it the other day? Everyone I hear on the inside says we're about to attack Iran. I think you just said something about that the other day. Am I wrong about that? I thought I saw in one of your interviews that you did.
Possibly.
No. Okay.
That doesn't mean we are on the verge of a war. I mean, you keep referring to we being in wars. There's a very big difference between a country.
So you can't communicate anything unless you are an expert on a subject. And what's the qualification for an expert? Somebody tell me that. What qualifies as an expert? Is it a degree? Is it spending time? According to Douglas Murray, you can't talk about the Holocaust unless you were in Auschwitz, the concentration camp, with the Jews. You can't talk about it. Now, I don't think he visited a concentration camp during World War II. How can you talk about it? It's preposterous. Again, what do the experts know? We know for a fact that the experts oftentimes are bought and paid for by the government or the pharmaceutical companies or the military industrial complex, Boeing or Lockheed or Raytheon. You have big money infiltrating every sect of society. So what does an expert mean? The only way to get a truly unbiased opinion, and you have audience capture, of course. So if I have an audience who wants me to talk about, and I get more support for talking for pro-Ukraine, for example, talking points, well, then that's audience capture. I might be more likely to take their side, even if they do something wrong. But as an independent person, without big money, without being on a news channel, without being in the government, it makes that seem more reliable than the experts who have been infiltrated, who have bribes, and they're willing to take $1 million to say something positive about a controversial subject. Of course. So the experts have been compromised. That's the problem. And you have gatekeepers like Douglas here who don't want people talking about something unless they have a post-grad degree in a given subject, but that gives them the latitude to talk about any subject as if they were an expert. It's really contradictory, frankly. So here we have it. Here's you can't be an expert unless you've been to the place in question. And guys, I encourage you, we're not going to go through the entire podcast. This video would be 3 hours, 4 hours long and talk about everything that they discussed. Frankly, the first hour of the podcast was reiterating the same thing over and over, this debate, this argument about what you can talk about, why you can't talk about it, and that you can cop out because you can say, I'm not an expert. Does that matter? It's a free speech society. You're going to have free speech. And so he's talking about needing to go to, he's visited Gaza, he can talk about it. He's visited Israel, he can talk about it.
No deficit of goods coming in. I've been plenty of times.
There was no deficit?
No, there are
No
plenty
goods were kept out.
There are plenty. How many? Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? I've never been to. Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you can.
Well, right.
But you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point? Like,
No,
okay.
I find that
Lots of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah, but
so
if
I don't
you're
know
going to
what
spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
all right.
And they won't let
I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't
but
think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an expert,
Well, you have to go and touch the ground. To
No,
be
I
able
think
talk
you have
about
to
it?
see. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you
okay.
spend a career talking about something.
It's a good idea.
Yes,
Is it mandatory to have
I have a
conversation?
journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country even in passing unless I've at least been there.
Okay.
It's
But
a
that's
sort
not
of normal. It's a normal thing to do. You're talking about. Hang on. You're talking about crossing points, and not only have you never been to a crossing point in either Egypt or in Israel, but you've never even been to the region.
Okay. Again, I
How
think this
can
is a
you-
non-argument.
Hang
I
on,
don't understand.
No, it's not a non-argument.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a non-argument if you're insisting that you're an expert of some kind, or not claiming you're an expert, but still talking about it, about the provisions going into Gaza or not. If you've never seen any of...
Is it-
No, there are
No
plenty
goods were
of-
kept out.
There are plenty... How many... Have you been to the crossing points?
No,
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? I've never been to. Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you
Well,
can.
right.
But you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point? Like,
No,
okay.
I find that
Lots
very...
of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah, but
so I
if
don't
you're
know
going
what
to
the.
spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
All right. I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't
but
think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an expert...
Well, you have to go and touch the ground. To
No,
be
I
able
think
talk
you have
about
to
it?
see... I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you
okay.
spend a career talking about something. Yes. I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country even in passing unless I've at least been there.
Okay.
It's a
But that's
sort of
not
normal. It's a normal thing to do. You're talking about... Hang on. You're talking about crossing points. And not only have you never been to a crossing point in either Egypt or in Israel, but you've never even been to the region.
Okay. Again, I
How
think this is
can
a
you-
non-argument.
Hang
I
on,
don't understand.
No, it's not a non-argument.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a non-argument if you're insisting that you're an expert of some kind, or not claiming you're an expert, but still talking about it, about the provisions going into Gaza or not. If you've never seen any of this going on.
So you're not
That's
allowed to
amazing
speak
to
about
me.
things that you've read about. You can only speak about things that you've seen with your own eyes.
You can talk about what you want, as you're proving. But that is a different matter from spending an awfully long amount of time talking about an issue in a region you haven't even had the courtesy to visit, whilst developing all of these views about it. I mean, now I slightly get an idea of where you're coming from. You've read about this blockade, and so you imagine that that's what it is. I imagine you've read all the people who say that Gaza was a concentration camp, and you probably think that too. Am I right?
I mean, again, literally a concentration camp. It shares a lot of similarities, I would think.
Wow. Well, as I say, you can't time travel
Let's go
back to the
back to the
Nazi
block.
era.
Let's
but
go
you
back.
So this is the gatekeeping narrative again. There's always going to be another thing that you have to accomplish before you can actually communicate or send messaging about a given subject. It's a red herring. It's a straw man. It's a way to attack a person's perspective without tackling the subject of their argument. It's incredibly biased, and I don't disagree with him. It's great. It's ideal if you go see a place and you can talk about it for as long as you want. But when you look at the data, you look at the facts, is it a concentration camp? We'll leave that to the experts. But bombing indiscriminately civilian areas, refugee camps, there are ways to get around that instead of just, again, indiscriminately bombing it. We can make points related to a controversial subject that is a major humanitarian rights issue. But because we haven't been there, it makes our points less valid. Again, I can see where he's coming from. But lastly, we'll run through this. There's a really curious thing that Douglas does here. He strawmans the conversation regarding the 7 points, and we want to overthrow in 1991 Wesley Clark brought it to people that he was told, and it came down from on high, Donald Rumsfeld, that, and Wolfowitz, that is who he saw it from, that we were going to overthrow, regime change, 7 countries. And instead of having a conversation around the controversy, he defaults to the anti-Semitism, the Wolfowitz, the conspiracy theory angle, where he tries to debunk Dave's point in that this is an imperialistic stance that the United States was in, and it was mainly because of Israel. And additionally, Libya, and Douglas doesn't realize it, but he affirms what Douglas says, or Douglas affirms what Dave says, in that it became the Libyan model, that Israel wanted to overthrow hostile regimes in the Middle East, and Libya gave up their nuclear weapons, and guess what? They were overthrown. So Douglas attacks the Jewish angle, Wolfowitz, and the name, and instead of the conversation, and he tries to, again, debunk Dave's point by saying, well, why would the U.S. do that? Why would the U.S. want to do that? It's absurd.
He hands over the nuclear program and thus makes himself very vulnerable, unfortunately, for the future of world peace. Libya has been unutterably disastrous for
I'm sorry,
Europe. Hang on.
No, just a clarifying question.
Disastrous for Europe.
I agree with you.
And Somalia and Sudan. Why does America or Israel want to do regime change in Somalia?
Can I just ask you? Can I just ask you a clarifying question on this? When you say that was a disaster for the prospects of world peace, you mean overthrowing Gaddafi was a disaster?
I say that him being. Sorry, I should have clarified. My thing is, him being overthrown after he's given over the nuclear weapons is a disaster, because it leaves on the table this thing that you have to hold on to nuclear weapons, and if you don't hold on to nuclear weapons, you could be dead.
Do you think maybe the Israelis should stop using the term the Libyan model to push for negotiations with Iran?
No, I don't think anyone should use what happened to Gaddafi as being a good precursor.
We certainly have a lot of agreement there. It was an absolute disaster, particularly to do it, to let a guy get sodomized to death after he denuclearized is not a good precedent to set.
I agree, and that's one of the reasons why
Iran wants a nuke so bad.
I'm not sure it's just to avert being sodomized to death. Certainly not.
Here's the angle that he takes here is preposterous.
When you start talking about Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl, it's all.
And he doesn't take a stance where he automatically defaults to the conspiracy theories. it's anytime you bring up a guy with a name like Wolf and Jewish end to the name, it's going to breed conspiracies. Well, that's not the point. Wolfowitz brought it forth, and that's how we know that they were trying to overthrow a lot of the Middle East.
Awfully noxious smelling. Richard Perle was a member of the Defense Policy Board, which had an advisory capacity toward the Pentagon in the early 2000s, but it was by no means a policy board that dictated Pentagon policy. Okay. In the last 30 years of American foreign policy, there have been many major actors. Paul Wolfowitz is a relatively major one. But we come slightly back full circle. In my view, I'm not saying you're guilty of this, certainly not knowingly. In my view, when people start talking about Paul Wolfowitz, I always remember that line of Mark Stein's many years ago, and he said, you can't help thinking that one of the reasons why people find Wolfowitz so appealing to talk about is that his name starts with a nasty animal and ends Jewish.
That is a funny thing to say.
People love saying Wolfowitz.
It's such a great name.
It is for
an evil villain in a movie.
You can say, aha.
Yeah.
He's perfect for it. Perfect for it.
And he looks perfect for it.
Right. You'll say, oh, the crafty Paul Wolfowitz.
His crazy eyebrows.
So you're a bigot. You're a Jew hater if you mention the neocons?
No. Just let me continue.
And it's a perfect way to dismantle what he just said.
I remember those days, and his boss, Donald Rumsfeld, was like the ruler of the world at that time. He had
Rumsfeld,
such charisma,
but it's
such
a diversion.
Genius was attributed to him.
It's a diversion
For the initial invasion of Iraq. People, you can't imagine the admiration that existed in the defense establishments around the world for Rumsfeld. Dick Cheney was so powerful that people of right and left, particularly on the left, spent all those years in the W. Bush administration saying W wasn't the real president. He was being run by Dick Cheney because he was the brilliant, et cetera, et cetera.
You're certainly listening to him at the beginning.
Okay, but I'm just saying it goes back to this thing of when certain ideas catch hold and what's really going on in them. Now, to attribute American foreign policy in the last 40 years to Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Perle is, knowingly or otherwise, to encourage a conspiracy that has very obvious legs. And I just urge you not to do it.
Okay, let me respond to this a little bit. First of all, it is not at all saying that these...
So why lump everything in together? It's trying to find a way to escape the conversation when it has been Israel who has been the reason we have gone into a lot of these places and overthrown these regimes is because we're at the behest of Israel. So the last thing here, this is peak cope. And it's a way, again, to divert attention away from the subject. And he brings in the Rothschilds and the cabal who runs the world and global finance, which is just a scapegoat and a way to get out of meaningful conversation and dialogue where Dave can make a good point, but then you latch on to something like Wolfowitz in his name, or that Wolfowitz, just before that clip that we just watched, Wolfowitz, he said he wasn't even big in the administration, but he's the deputy director of defense. So
I'm saying I'm using the quote for a reason. I was connecting it to an argument.
And I'm saying to you,
I'm giving fertile ground to Jew haters to mention it.
I think that when you decide to elevate what is a conspiracy of people who are overthrowing the governments of various countries, some of which haven't been overthrown and others of which have, but by the way, were not overthrown by American dominance, certainly not in Syria. And then you say that the people who are doing it are these people with Jewish names. I think you should be more judicious than that, because you probably know what bubbles up underneath you online by now.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no question that there are, no matter what, and by the way, it's funny just hearing you say this to me. I mean, look, and by the way, I completely agree with you. I think you've been one of the best champions on opposing Europe's insane immigration policy. I also think the United States of America's had an insane immigration policy. I'm happy to see that
Point of agreement.
That seems to be being reversed. But imagine you made a point about immigration, and I were to say to you, be careful what's bubbling up online, because now look, the fact is, if you are taking a position that opposes, say, Muslim immigration into the UK, then yes, it is quite possible that a lot of people who really just hate Muslims are going to end up liking what you had to say or following you. But that doesn't mean you're responsible to it. And if I were to say that to you, you would be the first to very eloquently point out that that is a complete non-argument. The question is this policy good or is it bad? And whether there's not...
There it is. You cannot be held responsible for the discussions that you have when people take it and run with it. Otherwise, we would have no ability to use social media because we would be irresponsible for following anything or discussing anything other than the mainstream narrative. This is so easily refutable. But I know this video, that my video is going to ruffle a couple of feathers. That's fine. You can call me an idiot. I just said at the beginning, I'm not an expert. Disclaimer. The problem is with Douglas Murray is he's contradicted himself countless times. I admire him. I respect his intellect. I think that he's done a lot of good work. He's been on a brigade against the insane immigration policies and wokeism in Europe. He's done a lot of good work. But this, in trying to gatekeep who can talk about what, but then you can talk about everything that you want to, it was paradoxical and contradictory the entire time. So it's blown the world up. It's been extremely viral. And again, it's been tribal. People take Douglas aside because they admire him and he's an expert or whatever, and dismantle Dave. And then other people are saying the same. I try to be fair here, but we should be able to talk about whatever we want to talk about. And if people get radicalized online, whether you're radical or not, that's your right to speak about things that you may or may not even know anything about. So thanks for tuning in. I thought it was, the first hour was hard to watch, but yeah, there's the highlights for you. Peace.